To understand how Rahu and Ketu is going to perform in a chart, not only do we have to look to the sign and the house that it sits in, we also have to analyze the planets that sit in conjunction or opposition from Rahu and Ketu. Let's use Lana Del Rey's chart to do a little analysis and understand her Ketu Saturn in the first house and her Rahu Venus in the seventh house. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Samantha. I'm a professionally trained Vedic sidereal astrologer. So let's go into Lana's Vedic sidereal astrology chart today. She has truly the chart of a artist and a singer and fame and all of that sort of stuff. But what I'm actually more interested in getting into today is her Ketu Saturn in the first house and her Venus Rahu in the seventh house, because there's so much we can take from those planetary conjunctions. So much. We can tell so much of her life story by just looking at Ketu with Saturn in the first house and Rahu Venus in the seventh house. All right, so Ketu Saturn in a 5-degree conjunction. Something I want us to take note of as we're going through Lana's chart as well too, is that the tighter a conjunction, the tighter and more potent the energy will be felt. All right, so see how Ketu is at 23 degrees, 41 seconds. Saturn is at 28 degrees, 42 seconds. That's a very tight conjunction. That's about 5 degrees or so. All right, tight conjunction. So we feel that Ketu Saturn energy stronger than if it was like 20 degrees apart, 15 degrees apart, all right? Ketu Saturn together is a conjunction that will show a lot of different things. One, someone is very spiritually inclined in this lifetime. Why? Because Ketu is spirituality. It's something we're kind of letting go of. Saturn is also this energy that we're able to kind of have this mature wisdom about. So when Ketu comes together with Saturn, it will show someone who has this past life sort of understanding of spirituality. They kind of know how to work with the spiritual very naturally in this lifetime. And they also will let go very easily of the house that conjunction lies in, all right? So Ketu Saturn in the first house in that conjunction. Lana, it's very easy for her to let go of herself and her ego and her attachments in this lifetime because of that first house energy with Ketu Saturn. So this would be the energy of someone who has past life gifts, past life talents around that first house, so the self, and that's what her whole career is about, her natural gifts and abilities that come through herself, right? That's Ketu Saturn, but also from a young age, Lana has understood spiritual and esoteric wisdom and sort of philosophical wisdom by nature because of that Ketu Saturn, and she's really able to let go of herself. She's able to just do things and take herself out of it. So that can cause issues when she gets into relationships with that Venus Rahu in the seventh, which we'll get into. But not everyone knows that side of Lana, I would say. I mean, maybe people do, but they don't understand that she's very selfless and she doesn't have a big ego in this lifetime. She can really let go of herself and lose herself in things and other people because of that Ketu Saturn in a tight conjunction in that first house. Something else about Ketu coming together with Saturn is it will cause a sense of someone not feeling that connected to the house it sits in. And so it's the first house of the self, right? So she doesn't always feel super connected to, one identity, one way of coming across, one way of being. She can kind of shift and go into different energies, and she can really kind of lose herself in other people because of that Ketu Saturn aspecting the seventh as well too. So she's really able to let go of herself. This is a really great conjunction in the first house for someone who wants to give back to the world, someone who's charitable, someone who is very much giving. And we can see also she has all these planets that go 12th from her moon. So 12th house is the house of charity, and Lana's a very charitable person, and I think that's the side of her that people don't always see with that Ketu Saturn in the first house and all those planets 12th from the moon. But she's given a lot of her life, and she actually probably dedicates a lot of her life to service and giving back because of that Ketu Saturn in the first house, all the planets 12th from the moon, all right? So that's what that Ketu Saturn in the first will create. And something you have to understand is Ketu is something that is so innately familiar, but when Saturn sits there, it actually creates this conjunction where someone isn't so attached to that house in this lifetime, and it's easier for them to let go of it, all right? So when we don't have Ketu in conjunction with Saturn, someone is usually very afraid to go towards their Rahu placement. All right, but when Ketu comes together with Saturn, that person is able to let go of their Ketu and is actually very drawn into their Rahu. All right, what is her Rahu, 7th house of relationships? So if we saw someone else's chart with Rahu in the 7th, we might say, oh, they're not really that called to go towards all these different relationships in this lifetime, but because of that Ketu Saturn in the 1st, it heightens that 7th house Rahu, where she's actually able to let go of herself, be more selfless, and go towards the 7th house, all right? That's why we can't do things so simplistically ever in Vedic astrology. There's so many things to analyze. All right, so that Ketu Saturn in the 1st house, she's very humble. She's been humbled a lot in this lifetime. She knows how to take herself and her ego outside of things, and she really isn't that connected to like this strong identity of who she is. She can kind of, go into other people's energy and other people's projections and things of that nature as well too. All right, now we go over to her 7th house, where she has a very, very tight conjunction of Venus, Rahu in Aries in the 7th house. So Venus with Rahu, 2-degree orb of a conjunction. She attracts all sorts of tumultuous, up and down, Rahuvian-like relationships and romantic partners. All right, what is Rahu? Rahu is extremes. Rahu is the material world. Rahu is ego. So Lana in her relationships really lets go of herself. She really loses herself, and she doesn't have this big ego about her in her relationships because of that Ketu Saturn in the 1st. Venus Rahu in the 7th, she attracts relationships and attracts partnerships where they have this sort of big ego. They might have ego issues, identity issues, and they're kind of these larger than life people. All right, she attracts very Venus Rahu people, Bharani Nakshatra, Aries, disposited by Mars. She also attracts very aggressive, intense relationships, right? That's that Rahuvian energy coming into her 7th house, coming in conjunction in a 2-degree orb with Venus. Yes, we can confirm this, and we know this because we've seen this in all her music over and over again, right? That's that Venus Rahu in the 7th house. Venus Rahu also attracts foreigners, so she's also been in a lot of relationships, I'm sure, with people from different cultures, different countries. She might have even met a lot of her past partners and relationships on travels while she was away from her hometown. Things of that nature with that Venus Rahu. And also her 7th house Lord going into the 9th house. 9th house is also travels and people from different cultures. So she's really dated like a wide spectrum of different people and different types culturally speaking. But she always kind of goes back to this one type of person with that Venus Rahu in the 7th house of Aries, disposited by Mars. She's always drawn to an aggressive, intense person who's kind of the life of the party, and they're loud and they're a little bit egoic. That's the person that she's always naturally drawn to with that Venus Rahu in the 7th of Aries. And she's also very drawn to creative types. All right, so Venus is also creativity. Rahu in that 7th house, she's very drawn to creative, artistic people as well too. All right, so we can quite literally see her whole life story through her music, that we can see through that Venus Rahu conjunction in the 7th house of Aries and that Ketu Saturn conjunction in Libra. All right, all her karmic experiences in this lifetime are between how much she gives herself to relationships, how much she can lose herself in those relationships. Interestingly enough, I don't think we always see this side of her in the media or in the public so much, because Ketu Saturn also restricts. So what's funny about that Ketu together with Saturn is she does not like really being seen, right? Saturn is very much behind the scenes. Ketu is elusive, mysterious. So we've also seen in her career, like she hasn't been very much out in a lot of interviews and things like that. She's always very hidden. That's Saturn, that's Ketu in conjunction. She kind of likes to be behind the scenes, mysterious, elusive with that conjunction as well too. All right, but I think the side of her we don't always see with Ketu Saturn in the 1st and so many planets that go 12th from her moon is she is really a mystic at her core, and she's very charitable, she's very giving. She feels her best when she's selfless and when she's giving back to others with that Ketu Saturn in the 1st and all those planets going 12th from the moon. All right, so this is why it's so important to not just analyze where Rahu and Ketu sit in sign or in house, but also what planets are making conjunctions to Ketu and to Rahu. Because when Venus is with Rahu, it heightens all the intense romantic relationships and her creativity is heightened. Ketu with Saturn, it makes her even more reclusive and kind of elusive into herself, but also very much someone who understands the mystical and the spiritual in this lifetime. She's very able to let go of herself. All right, this is an analysis of her chart today.